And now I'd like to pass on the floor to a person who I don't think I actually need to introduce because you know him perfectly well. This is Chief Landscape Designer of the Apothecary Garden of the Botanical Gardens and the winner of the National Landscape Design Contest, Artem Parshin. The floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, being the host of this event, I'd like to welcome all of you once again to the Botanical Garden. Please raise your hand if this is your first time in the Botanical Garden. Well, you're twice as lucky as the rest of the people in the audience. Actually, I already touched upon some of the things that I'm gonna brief you on last year, but nevertheless, I will briefly go over the sustainability practices that we embrace here in the Botanical Garden. Because we've been doing that for years on end. And then I will brief you on the new project that we have been implementing during the past 12 months. Let me remind you that we are in the oldest botanical garden in Russia. This year we turned 314 years. Not only is the figure itself is impressive, but the botanical garden has been preserved in downtown Moscow, and we've boasted a continuous history of growing plants here. This is the bird's view of the garden. It just goes to show you how small it is and how tightly surrounded it is by the municipal buildings. We are not linked with the wildlife, and it's difficult to survive in such an environment, but the garden is lucky because it has us. We will help it survive. And in May, the foot traffic is 10,000 people per day. I guess this is the limit that we have to deal with. We don't know how to increase the capacity because the popularity of the garden is growing. People come here not only to take a look at the plants. Actually, this is not the main reason. They just come here because this is a sanctuary right in downtown Moscow. And in downtown Moscow, there are few such old-time green zones that we try to promote as something unique. We are not funded by the Moscow government. On the one hand, it means that we are on a tight budget, but on the other hand, it actually means that we don't have to follow the one-size-fits-all principle, which is true for other green zones. So most of the other green spaces have lost their identity, but this is a separate subject for discussion. This is the layout, which is quite complicated. By the way, you can grab a map like that at the reception desk. This is just a good illustration of how many things we used to have in the garden and still have here. The layout is quite complex. The landscape itself is quite complex. Naturally, plants are the main players. They grow, they produce lots of organic substance, and that's exactly what I'm going to focus on in the second part of my presentation. To deep dive into the context, I just wanted to show a couple of bullets demonstrating our activities here. And the last bullet is the sustainability policy and the environmental efforts that we do not spare to preserve this quasi-wildlife sanctuary. I actually invite all of you back here in a couple of months. Because without, as they say, one picture is worth a thousand words. And this is the outcome of a well-thought-through management. This is the same spot a couple of months later, and as you can see, the image is totally different. Different plants blossom, and again, this is a proof that it's a multi-layer community. Multiple plants grow in the same space. And by the way, it also includes insects, not just plants. There are worms, fungi, bacteria, and naturally we have to take all of their needs into account. Unfortunately, plants, as any living organism, die, and this is an inevitable consequence for any garden. And some of the wood that we get, we don't consider it garbage, by the way. Well, I guess this is an obvious thing to you, but it's not that obvious to just an average citizen. This is the way we use the cut wood. You can actually use it as temporary pavement, but usually we just crush the dead wood, and the chips can be used for mulching, for pathways, because it's much more pleasant to walk on a chip covered wood chips covered pathway as opposed to the gravel path. For instance, shown on the left-hand side is the thing I'm talking about. This is our conscious choice, and we do this on purpose. Some of the images showing dead leaves, we don't consider it to be a waste, and we don't rake the dead leaves, and thanks to this not doing anything, we get such beautiful images that I demonstrated in the previous pictures. Another example of the very same spot, well, actually, usually that happens in mid-April, but given the current weather, I don't even know when you're going to see an image like that this year. Some of the plants are not local. Actually, these are the remains of the species that grew here back in the 19th century, and when this garden used to be on the outskirts of the city, but now we are in downtown Moscow, while these communities still exist. However, there are a number of exotic plants that originate from southern parts of Russia, and that is linked with the previous presentation. Well, there are different views on whether it's dangerous to mix exotic plants with native plants. By the way, botanic gardens are the main source of the dangerous weeds. At least that's been the case for the past century. And we actually cannot but keep thinking about that. In the past, no one was concerned about the seeds of the exotic plants that can result in weeding and dominating the spaces. Anyway, organic substance is processed in the garden. We try to talk and communicate with our visitors. That's the main topic of my presentation. We have to communicate with people because, city dwellers have no idea what we do here. They don't even understand that dead wood and dead leaves, as well as other organic substances, is not just waste. And we try to crush organic matter here, and we use it as in the form of wood chips and fertilizers. The only exception are contaminated substances, but you can actually burn it here and use the ash as a fertilizer. You don't need to take your waste anywhere else. Rainwater is another challenge that we face. In the past, the most common school of thought was to drain rainwater as fast as possible, just pump it into the wastewater system. This is no longer the case. Rainwater is now considered to be an asset rather than a liability. Secondary water use is a must now. Water will filter into the soil. It will either wet the soil or evaporate. These are the two biggest greenhouses that we have here, and we collect rainwater from the roofs, and then it flows into the underground water tank. These old-time water tanks can be seen when you go down the stairs to the food court. We can accumulate about 80 cubic meters of rainwater. That's the capacity of the water tank. And naturally, we use the rainwater to water the plants growing in our glass houses. Not only does it allow us to save 20% of the costs, but rainwater is of much better quality than tap water. Well, St. Pete people are lucky because the quality of tap water in St. Pete is great, and you don't get the whitish substance on the leaves if you water your plants with St. Pete tap water. But in Moscow, the quality of water is poor. This is a 2-year-long project that we implemented. This flowchart shows the way we collect rainwater and put it into the underground water tanks. Well, now you know what to look for when you go down the stairs to the food court. These are slanted roofs that we constructed for the cacti. This is a special framework that allows the sun to illuminate the glass houses while the rainwater flows into the water tanks on the slopes. And this is the rainwater pipelines. Actually, a gardener can either water the plants with rainwater or with tap water. Surface water is usually used to sprinkle the walkways in the garden, while rainwater is primarily used to water the plants. Orchids and other plants cannot survive tap water. We have to desalinate it first. And right here you can see the reverse osmosis system to desalinate the tap water. It's not a challenge as far as the rainwater is concerned. You can just use it immediately without desalination. Another recent project, which we call an urban garden for bees. Previous speakers already mentioned that insects have a hard time living in such small gardens, and they don't get enough food here, especially when the lime tree no longer blossoms. Therefore, we have a special part in the garden for the bees to feed on. These are the plants that blossom in late spring, and naturally we do not produce honey here. We'll just use the plants to feed the bees. This image does not show a single native plant, but these are the honey-bearing plants, honey plants. But for the Sklifosovsky Hospital, which is in the background, you might have thought that this was somewhere outside of Moscow, but actually this is in downtown Moscow. This is the European Russia flora. We planted these plants to simulate a wildlife ecosystem. Actually, it is a wildlife ecosystem because we used only those species that grow in European Russia, and that's to answer the question whether you can integrate wildlife in an artificial urban-based garden. There are a number of rare species that we have here, and most of the Muscovites probably saw such species for the first time here. We sport here 20 rare species. And this is a national park. You cannot walk off the walkways, but it's a real wildlife sanctuary. But for the labels, you might have thought that it was just a woodland somewhere outside of Moscow. I personally believe that it's a very successful project. It is impressive, and it just goes to show you that if you spend enough time, effort, and money, you can create naturalistic spaces even in downtown Moscow. We try to attract birds. Some of the species get here without asking our permission, but because of the climate change, these birds move to the north more, and that's why they're here. And this is something that I wanted to talk to you about in greater detail. Last year, I demonstrated this flowchart because back then it was just an idea, but this year it's an already operational project. This is a demo. This is a demo compost farm. The size is 15 by 15 meters. It is based on a reinforced concrete platform with the drainage system. The reinforced concrete was a must because we wanted the vehicles to drive on it. And this is, I guess, the largest hotel for insects, if you will. It's open on from both sides, and you can actually enter this farm. This is the most traditional compost production system that we use, but there are different systems on display that you can use in your cottage houses or produce enough organic matter for large parks. However, the most interesting thing here is this box, which is compost produced by worms. The volume is a couple of cubic meters. You can stuff straw there, and worms inhabit this box. So these worms are not exotic. These are native worms, and unlike other worms, their habitat is the border between the productive soil and compost. So the densest layer is at the bottom of the box, but we also have a motor with a winch, and the blades are dull, so as not to cut down the worms. So the compost does not have to be sieved or filtered because it's of an ideal quality. So it's a closed loop system. You just add some organic matter on top, and you get compost from the bottom. It takes 1.5 to 2 months to produce quite a significant amount of ideal compost, and the only thing you need is worms. When the farm is locked, there are no people inside, but the mesh is totally transparent, therefore any visitor can actually take a closer look at it. And in the backyard we have a wooden bridge of sorts, an elevated platform. You can stand on it to peek over the fence into the compost farm. And we have labels demonstrating the info on most of the compost production systems that we have. So you don't even have to go on a guided tour. You can get this info just simply by reading the labels. This project was sponsored by Pernod Ricard. It's a French hard liquor producer, but they have a huge Moscow-based office staffed by about 200 people. Most of them are young people. They're white collars, and I guess for most of them, compost was a word they have never heard before. So once a year, these guys get out of their office and do something useful. So they, in our case, they did a couple of useful projects. For instance, they were engaged in the construction work in the compost farm. It took them several hours to construct some of the things that otherwise would have taken us months to do. So basically, they did the wood construction. They put the organic matter inside these boxes, and these are the traditional compost production systems. Well, music played throughout this team building event. This is the so-called insects hotel. As you can see, the rocks are at the bottom to ensure enough stability for the structure, while shown on top are various organic various types of organic matter suitable for the insects. We brought different weeds from all over the garden while these guys were here. So they filled all the compost production boxes with the weeds, and then the baldest ones put the worms inside. I guess they got lasting impressions. And after that, we let out insects. In the image, I'm holding microscopic mites. So actually, they are not dangerous because these mites are dangerous only for other insects, but for humans, they are not dangerous. And that was the pick of the day. We let out ladybirds, because ladybirds are positive insects for the Russians. We put them into special cans, and at the very end we let them out in the garden, which was right across the insect hotel. It's a simple way to engage lots of people and raise their awareness of what we do. Actually, this experience can be copied and pasted, and we'll be more than happy to share it with you. Then there was an official opening ceremony, and now we do take pride in this compost farm. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the floor? Actually, there are. Would you please pass the mic on to the person who just raised his or her hand? Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I have two questions, if I may. The first one is about the rainwater. You probably did the chemical analysis of the composition of the water. So are there any problems with the acid content because, of the air pollution caused by the vehicles? Shall I ask the second question afterwards? No, why don't you shoot all the questions? And what about the sanitary standards? Because, when you constructed the compost farm, did you have to meet any of the sanitary standards? And what about other parks? Would they have to meet the sanitary standards? Well, I have no clue what standards are in place for other parks. What about the supervisors? Don't they prohibit compost production within the city? Well, first and foremost, I don't think there is a direct ban. Otherwise, we would have known about that. But to take your first question, indeed, we did multiple water composition tests, and no matter how strange it might seem, rainwater is quite clean. Moreover, when it rains for quite a long time, you don't collect rainwater for the first 30 minutes because we want our roofs to be washed off as well, and an hour, half an hour or an hour later, you can collect rainwater into the underground water tanks. But even then, we can still separate some petroleum products and contaminants. Well, my second question is, we used to have a similar worm-based compost production system, but my question is, what's the current status of the worms, and what happens with the worms after a certain period of time? Do you have to replace the worms with others? No, actually, we don't replace them. We can keep them underground where the temperature, ambient temperature is plus 3 degrees above zero, and they just hibernate. They don't have to be fed at ambient temperatures like that. So this compost production system is now empty. Well, given the freezing temperatures outside, the worms would have frozen. So we actually put them in the cellars where the temperatures are not as low. Hold on a second. Good afternoon. I was just wondering, where do you get ladybugs to populate your entire hotel? Actually, golden opsal ladybugs have to be certified. Well, you have to get a certificate to both sell them and to buy them. You cannot just go out and buy them. That's a pity. Moreover, ladybirds are not produced here. They have to be imported. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have the following question. What are your current plans for this year? Because each and every time you come up with some new idea and you always surprise us. And by the way, thank you for the guided tour that we all experienced. What are your plans for 2020? I'm superstitious, so I'm not going to share all of our plans with you, but I guess I could safely say that we have a huge fields that we allocate for summertime to operate various performances and concerts, and around the perimeter of this field, we will have a string of different small-sized gardens, and the first one is going to be the rain garden. At the level of the ground, we will try to demonstrate different types of green, vegetation-covered roofs. You would be able to feel and touch all these plants. This garden will accumulate the drained water from the entire field, and it will be a show of sustainable water bodies in the city, and we're going to have a special community of plants that can survive both floods and droughts. I have a question about bees. Did you buy them? Did you import them? And did you have any incidents involving bees and visitors? You know, because you said that your foot traffic is 10,000 people per day. Indeed, bees are different. There are aggressive bees, so don't buy them for public spaces. In our case, we experimented with different species, including hybrid species. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but our chief gardener, Anton Levinyuk, is somewhere in the back of the room, so you should probably address this question to him. But we experimented with the so-called Russian bee, which originates from the Russian Far East. These species do not fall sick, subject to various diseases, unlike other species, and these species are not aggressive. So we have just one case when there was a bee bite, but actually it was an employee that got bitten, but not a single visitor ever complained about bee bites. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for the wonderful expo of the plants growing in Russia that you have here. Oftentimes, I bring my friends to this garden and give them a guided tour. And actually, I'm talking about friends who have their own cottage houses, and these are guys who go into the wild all the time. But nevertheless, they get impressed by the beauty that you have here. Thank you for that. Well, actually, it's one of the points that we tried to drive home. Even in the urban terrain, you can build gardens. Indeed, that's an eye opener because oftentimes people just don't realize how beautiful such gardens might be. And my question is as follows: if I'm not mistaken, this summer, you asked everyone to bring frogs into your garden. So my question is, what was the outcome? And the second question is about the hotel for insects. So you have rocks at the bottom. I was just wondering whether you're gonna put any lizards there? Actually, no, because lizards will freeze in the winter. I don't want to experiment. I take pity on lizards. As for the frogs, actually, it was a false alarm because, it's not good to bring animals from the wild and take them into an urban terrain. And we never succeeded in providing habitat for the frogs. By the way, but we have quite a number of efts here. They're in the pond that we have here. Don't bring any frogs here. Can I ask you another question? Olga Cherdantseva, I work for the Russian Museum. We've been friends for years on end, and actually both gardens were established by Peter the Great. Both of our gardens date back to the same period. And today we're celebrating the day of death of Peter the Great. So I was just wondering if we could exchange some of the plants with each other. I'll give you an oak. Is that possible? Actually, we have discussed this. We have a large tree here, which was planted by Peter the Great, and that was confirmed by the scientific test. The large tree this large tree is almost dead, but we decided to use its tissue to plant other trees, but this experiment failed. This spring we're gonna try. We're gonna make another attempt at that.
Yeah, could I just ask you, are you working with any of the universities in Moscow to do sort of comprehensive invertebrate sampling of what you have in the gardens and just to establish a baseline, or has that work already been done in Moscow?
Нет. Ну, во-первых,
Well, the answer is no, because we are part of the Moscow State University, but the overall answer is no. We are open to any collaboration and cooperation. If there are any volunteers, if there are any partners, we'll be happy to analyze any proposal. Let's move on. Thank you so much.